Hi everybody. In this YouTube tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at and use the debugging facilities within NetBeans to debug a PHP application. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a PHP application that contains some errors, and then we're going to use the facilities within NetBeans to track down and correct those errors. And then what you're going to do is you're going to submit the corrected PHP application as part of your deliverable for this YouTube assignment. Okay? But before we jump into the code and into NetBeans, I want to talk just in general about the different types of errors that could exist in a PHP application. And in the broadest sense, there are two. There are syntax errors and there are logic errors. Okay. Now, a syntax error occurs when the environment that you're programming in, it doesn't understand your code. And in the case of NetBeans, it's going to immediately let you know when you've typed in a syntax error, because what happens as you're typing is you're going to see a red squiggly line underneath of a particular line of code if it contains a syntax error. NetBeans is going to let you know right then and there as you're coding you have a syntax error. It's going to put a red squiggly line underneath of the line of code that's in error. The other broad category of errors are logic errors. And these errors don't occur when you're typing in your code. They occur when your application is running. And these types of errors, they occur when your code isn't behaving the way that you thought it would. Okay? Now, the debugging facilities within NetBeans, they help you track down and correct logic errors. Not syntax errors, but logic errors. And there are 4 different facilities within NetBeans that we're going to take a look at that allow you to do this. There are breakpoints, there's the variables window, there is this step over button and a step into button. Okay, so 4 facilities within NetBeans. Let's talk about them a little bit. First of all, breakpoints. What is a breakpoint? Well, a breakpoint is a note to NetBeans to stop your application at a particular line of code. The variables window is a window that allows you to view the variables in your application along with their values. The step over button allows you to step over. And when I say step over, what I mean is it allows you to execute the lines of code in your application a single line at a time. And then the step into button, it allows you to step into functions. Okay, so 4 different facilities: breakpoints, the variables window, the step over button, and the step into button. Okay, now what I have given you is a PHP application that is in error. It contains some logic errors. What it's supposed to be doing is illustrated or specified, I guess I should say, on this slide. What it's supposed to be doing is creating an array of Celsius temperatures, 3 of them, -40, 0, and 100. It's supposed to be creating an array of 3 Fahrenheit temperatures, -40, 32, and 212. It's supposed to define a function named displayCelsius that converts Fahrenheit temperatures into Celsius temperatures, and then it displays both of the temperatures. It should define a function named displayFahrenheit that converts Celsius temperatures into Fahrenheit temperatures and displays both temperatures. And the screenshot on this slide over on the right hand side, it illustrates the output of the PHP application. Okay, at the top. First of all, we're converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So -40 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to -40 degrees Celsius. 32 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 0 degrees Celsius. 212 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 100 degrees Celsius. Down below, we're converting from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So negative 40 degrees Celsius is equal to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. 0 degrees Celsius is equal to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And last but not least, 100 degrees Celsius is equal to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the way that the PHP application should perform. That's the output that it should generate. Okay? PHP application that I gave you contains logic errors. It's not going to generate that output. It's not going to expect. It's not going to behave as we expected. Okay? So let's go and find out why. But first we have to set up the project. Okay? So what you're going to want to do is go out to wherever you have saved the PHP application, and I provided it to you in the form of a zip file. The zip file was called php project-temperature-converter.zip. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract that zip file, extract the contents of the zip file right here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, and this is a PHP project, I'm going to copy it over into my folder for this course. Okay, just to make it easier, a little easier for me to open it up into NetBeans. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is go into NetBeans, and I'm going to open up the index.php file in that PHP project, just the single file. So I'm going to go to File, Open File, and then I'm going to find my PHP project. There it is, PHP project temperature converter. I'm going to go into that project, and there's the index.php, and I'm going to open up the file. There it is. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my own PHP project that I'm going to work from. So I'm going to set up a new project, new PHP project called PHP project-temperature converter. And I'm going to make sure that I save it out into my WAMP www directory. And the file already exists for me, so I'm going to go back. You won't have to do this, I apologize. I'm going to name it temperature converter 2. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that I save it out in my WAMP www directory, and I'm going to push finish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the contents of the index.php that was in the zip file, copy it, and I guess I can, even if I want to, I can copy the head and the entire body. Copy the entire head and the entire body and all of the PHP code in between. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it into the index.php of this new PHP project that I set up, this new PHP application that I set up, and I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to close the index.php that was in the zip file. Okay? So now what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm just going to run, okay, this PHP application. I'm going to run it. Okay? And there you can see that the output isn't what I expected. Okay, when I ran this application, it's telling me that negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to negative 54.22222 degrees Celsius. 32 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to negative 14.2222 degrees Celsius, and so on and so forth. And if we go down below, we can also see that the conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit is wrong too. It's telling me that negative 40 degrees Celsius is equal to negative 14.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And we know, based on the requirements that we were given, that these are not the correct values. So there's a logic error. in our PHP application. Okay, and here is where we're going to use the debugging facilities within NetBeans to track down the logic errors. Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, what I want to ask you to do, if you could go up to the top of NetBeans and in the window drop down, make sure you open up the output window, and then go back up to the window drop down, and underneath of debugging, I'd like to ask you to make sure you open up the variables window. Okay, and you may not even really need the output window. I told you to open it, but now on second hand I think you probably are not going to need it. You will need the variables window though. Okay, but now what we're going to do is we're going to debug this file using the variables window. It's already open at the bottom, using breakpoints, and then stepping over and stepping into the code. Okay, but first of all, what we have to do is we have to debug the file. So select the file, highlight it, or select it so that it's highlighted in blue, and then do a right click, and from within the pop-up that appears, this time select debug. Don't select run, select debug. Okay, and what's going to happen is it's going to appear to start loading in the browser, and you should have something that looks like this. You can see at the top of the browser it's saying waiting for localhost. Okay, but nothing is loading, nothing is rendering in the browser, and that's to be expected. Well, if you go back into NetBeans, what's happened is we've hit a breakpoint, and the breakpoint that we hit is actually the start tag for the PHP element. It's paused, okay, on the start tag for the PHP element. So now what we can do is we can step over, we can execute one by one the lines of code, and we can see what's happening in the code, what's causing the logic errors. Okay, so and as we're stepping over, as we're executing the code, we can see the values that are in the variables, if they're correct or if they're incorrect. Okay, we can step into these functions that exist within the PHP code. Okay, so let's do that. We've hit a breakpoint, we've got our variables window open. Now what we're going to do is we're going to step over the code. We're going to execute the code a line at a time. Now at the top of NetBeans there are various buttons that allow you to perform these facilities. To step over a line of code, to execute it, you want to push the button that has an arrow that's sort of curved. If you place your cursor over the button, a pop-up's going to appear that says step over. Push that button. And what it does is it moves, you see the green arrow, okay, and the green bar. What it does is it moves it down to the next line of PHP code, which happens to be the function declaration for one of the functions in this application. Okay. Well, we're going to step over the function for now. So push the step over button again. Then what happens is we step over that function and we step down to the next one. Two functions. Remember, there are two functions within this PHP application. Just stepped over the first one. Now we're sitting on the second function. You can see, there we are, paused right there. There's a green arrow and the green bar. Okay, well, we're going to step over this function too for now. So push the step over button again. This then takes us down to the lines of PHP code where we're setting up our arrays. Okay, so let's step over, let's execute this line of code that's creating an array named Celsius. And I think this is interesting. Now in the variables window down below, you can see we have a variable, our array, Celsius, and it's telling us that it has 3 elements in it. And if we open it up, we can see its values. The first element contains a value of -40, the second element contains a value of 0, and the third element contains a value of 100. I would like to ask you to take a screenshot of this window with the Celsius array variable open in the variables tab with its values. take a screenshot of this window. Okay, we're going to step over the code again, the next line of code. We're going to execute the next line of code. Well, what's the next line of code doing? It just set up the Fahrenheit array. And you can see it down in the Variables tab. There it is, Fahrenheit. It's an array. It has 3 elements. We can open it up, and there are its values. Okay. Now we're going to step over the next line of code where we're setting up another variable called size. Okay. Okay, and if we scroll down into the Variables tab, we can see there's the size variable. It's an integer, and its value is 3. Okay. So now we're sitting on this line of code. We're ready to execute this line of code that's calling one of the functions, display Celsius. Okay. I'm not going to step over this line of code. What we're going to do is we're going to step into the function. We're going to step into it so that we can see what's happening inside of this function. Okay. So at the top of NetBeans, there is a button. It has an arrow pointing down. If you place your cursor over it, it says step into. Okay. I would like you to push that button, and that takes you into the display Celsius function. Okay. I'd like you to take a screenshot of this screen now with the green arrow and the green bar in the display Celsius function. Okay. Now, something interesting too that you can see down in the variables window. We have variables for Fahrenheit and we have a variable for size. We no longer have the Celsius variable, the Celsius array. Why? Because we're executing the code inside of the display Celsius function, and it doesn't use that variable. The only variables that it uses are the Fahrenheit variable and the size variable. And by the way, I also wanted to illustrate, in the code, if you place your cursor over a variable, a pop-up appears that shows you the contents of the variable too. So place your cursor over the Fahrenheit variable. You should see a pop-up that tells you it's an array with 3 elements, all integers, and it tells you the values. If you move your cursor over to the size variable, you can see it's an integer and its value is 3. And those values are also displayed down in the Variables tab. Okay. Well, let's now execute these lines of code inside of the display Celsius function. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to step over these lines of code. So we're going to push the step over button again. Okay. In this next line of code, we're setting a variable named Celsius equal to 0, and we can see that down in the variables window. And then we'll step over the echo statement, and now we're stepping into a loop. Okay, that looks like it's going to loop 3 times for each of the elements in the array. So we're going to push the step over button again. Now we've initialized I. If I scroll down, you can see I is equal to 0. That's our counter variable for the loop. I'm going to step over again. Now we step into the loop, and we begin executing its code. So I'm going to step over this line of code, which looks like to me we're actually calculating degrees Celsius, excuse me, which we happen to have a feeling based upon the output that this application is generating that this could potentially be the trouble spot, the logic error. But let's execute this line of code. We're going to step over it. And down below in the Variables tab, I can see that the Celsius value that was just calculated is negative 54.22. And I know it shouldn't be that. I know it should be a value of negative 40. Okay, so something has to be wrong on this line of code. I can see that right now as I'm debugging. I generated a value of 54.22 and I should have got a value of negative 40. Okay, so I know that the problem has to be here. Okay, so let's stop the debugger. Okay, and by the way, I should have explained that. The red button at the top of NetBeans, you can push that button and that stops the debugger. Okay, and actually what's going to happen if you go back out into your browser, you're going to see something that looks like this. First of all, you're going to have a tab that says debug session ended, and that's okay. That output should be generated, but you might also have a tab that illustrates how much of your PHP application you executed, okay, as you were stepping through the lines of code and debugging it. So if you see something like this happen, that's to be expected. Okay, you should see that. I'm going to close these tabs for now and go back into NetBeans. And what I'm going to do is, I know that this is the line of code that's in error. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to correct it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put parentheses, okay, around this part of the equation. Fahrenheit minus 32. Okay, Fahrenheit minus 32. I'm going to put parentheses around that part of the equation. I'm going to save those changes. And what I'm going to do is debug again and see if maybe that corrected the problem. Okay, so I'm going to select the file. And by the way, before you run, get a screenshot of this code where we're attempting to correct, okay, one of our logic errors. So get that screenshot, and then let's run debug, not run, let's debug this PHP application again. And we know it's going to stop. It's going to hit a breakpoint on the start tag of the PHP element. Okay? But what we can do, and this is kind of interesting, is maybe we don't want to step over all of those lines of code again. We want to get to the, get to the chase. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down in the file. We're going to set another breakpoint in the code. You can do that. You can set as many breakpoints in your code as you wish. To set a breakpoint, what you do is you move your cursor over into the code editor where the line numbers appear. Okay, and you do a left click on the number that corresponds to the line of code where you want to set your breakpoint. So I want to set a breakpoint here on this, where I'm calling this function display Celsius. Okay, so I'm going to do a left click, and then at that point you should see a red box and a red bar, and that tells you that you set another breakpoint. Then what you can do is you can, at the top of NetBeans, and by the way, this is the button that you push, the red square button you push to end a debugging session. But what we want to do is we want to continue on into our debugging session to our next breakpoint. For right now, we have a breakpoint set on the start tag. We don't have it set, but the debugger automatically stops. It breaks at the start tag. But what we want to do is we want to continue down to where we set this breakpoint. Okay, because we don't want to execute all those lines of code again one at a time. Okay, we want to get into this function as quickly as possible. So I'm going to push this continue button, and you can see it takes me down. The green bar is now on this line of code where I have the breakpoint set, and the green arrow is there as well. And you can see down here all of these variables have been set up: size, Fahrenheit, Celsius. So we executed a bunch of lines of code, but not stepping over them one at a time. We just continued right over them until we hit this breakpoint. But now what we're going to do, we're going to step into the function again, and we're going to step over its lines of code to see if we corrected the problem, if Celsius is now being calculated correctly, because the value for Celsius we know should be -40. So let's see if that correction worked. And it did. Okay, it's telling me that -40 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to -40 degrees Celsius. Well, let's make sure that that correction works for all of our Fahrenheit temperatures, for 32 and for 212. So let's continue stepping over the code. We're back at the top of the for loop. The next temperature that we're going to be converting is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which should be 0 degrees Celsius. So let's see if we get 0 degrees Celsius, and we do. So far our correction of the first logic error looks good. Okay, let's continue stepping over the code. Continue stepping over it. Last time through the loop. Now the last Fahrenheit temperature we're going to be converting is 212, and that should be 100 degrees Celsius. So let's step over and see if we get 100 degrees Celsius, and we do. Okay, we can see that down in the variables tab. Okay, so I'd like you to get a screenshot of this. So it looks like our first correction worked. We've stepped through the code, we've tested it all, we see the values are coming out correct. So now we're going to continue stepping through the code. We've just executed all of the lines of code in this first function, display Celsius. Now, at the end, what's going to happen is it's going to take me back down to the line of code after where I called the function. Here you can see this is where I called the function, and now the green bar and the arrow is flashing on the line after that. Okay. Now what we're going to do, though, is we're going to step into this display Fahrenheit function because we know it has a problem too. Okay, so let's step into it. There we are in the display Fahrenheit function, and you can see down in the variables tab that we have the variables that are being used only by this function, right? The Celsius array and the size variable. So let's step over the lines of code in this function too, one at a time, and see what the trouble might be. Okay, so let's step into this for loop, and here we're on the line of code where we're calculating Fahrenheit for our first Celsius degree temperature, which is -40, and we know that the Fahrenheit temperature should be -42, so let's see what happens. Well, nope, Fahrenheit is equal to -14.4, so the problem has to be on that line of code. Okay, so let's stop the debugging session. Okay, push the red button at the top of NetBeans to finish the debugger session. Okay, and let's make a correction to this line of code because we know this is where the problem is, right? So let's remove those parentheses around Celsius plus 32, and let's save those changes. Okay, by the way, if you go out into the browser, you can see you have those two tabs again, one that says debug session ended and the other that lists the output of your PHP application up to the point, you know, of the line of code that you executed before you stopped the debugging session. So let's close those two tabs. We corrected our code, the line of code that we think is an error. And by the way, get a screenshot of the corrected code. Get a screenshot of the corrected code. And let's set a different breakpoint in our code. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this breakpoint that we previously set. And to remove a breakpoint, you simply place your cursor over the red square and do a left click again. But what we're going to do is we're going to set a breakpoint on the line of code that's calling the display Fahrenheit function. Okay, and we're going to debug this file again. So let's debug it. And let's push the continue button. Now we're down on this line of code where we're ready to call, step into display Fahrenheit. But before we do that, I'd like you to get a screenshot of this. Get a screenshot of this, and then let's step into the display Fahrenheit function. And then let's step over its lines of code. And let's see if our correction worked. Okay, so we're just about to calculate our first degree Fahrenheit, and we know that it should be -40 degrees, so let's see what happens. And that looks good. But let's keep testing because we've got two other temperatures, two other Celsius temperatures. Next one is 0, which should coincide with 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's test that out. Okay, let's see if we get 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And we do. Okay, you can see that down in the variables tab. But let's keep testing. Let's continue stepping over the code one last time. And we're going to be converting 100 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit. So that should be 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's see if we get that. And we did. I'd like you to get a screenshot of this screen now. So it looks like our correction worked. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to stop the debug session. Okay, and again, you're going to get those two tabs. Okay, you can close those. One is going to say debug session ended, and the other is going to have display the output of your PHP application up until the point that we debugged. Okay, so it seems to me like we've completely debugged our application. The logic errors might be gone, but let's run the entire application and see if it works. Not debug it, but just run it. And go into the browser, and now it looks like it's behaving as we expected. We used debugging facilities within NetBeans to track down and correct the logic errors that existed in that PHP application. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is I would like you to export this PHP project to a zip, and I would like you to submit it with your screenshots. Thanks a lot.